Well, I can see, you can probably tell why I married this woman. And thank you, Esther. She's too modest to tell you about her career, but she's been with Doctors Without Borders since 1995, when she spent a year and a half in Burundi and Tanzania caring for refugees from the Rwandan genocide. That was her first day on the job. And since then, she's been in 38 missions. Her last was in Liberia in the Ebola campaign. She specializes in war zones and Ebola outbreaks and caring for people in the worst kinds of conditions. And I'm honored to be your husband. Well, I want to thank the Democrats of Bay County and the Black Democratic Caucus and the Young Democrats and all the other constituent groups that are here. This is the fourth time I've been in Panama City in the last 4 weeks. When I go back to Tallahassee, I tell my fellow Leon County Democrats that we've got a lot to learn from Bay County. You guys do a wonderful job, and you deserve a lot of credit for what you're about to do. I moved to Tallahassee in 1952 and went to public schools. I went to Florida State. I joined the Navy when I was 17. I had to get my mother's written permission. She was glad to get me out of the house for the summer, so it wasn't a problem. I stayed in the Navy as a drilling reservist when I went to Florida State. I went on active duty for 2 years, served on a ship that operated in the Caribbean and the Mediterranean. After getting out and coming back to Florida State and going to graduate school, I got a direct commission as a naval intelligence officer and served another 15 years. I retired as a lieutenant commander, and I treasured every day that I served. You don't need to educate me about the needs of our military and the needs of our veterans. They are foremost in my mind. I lived that life. I know what it's like. I was also active in the civil rights movement in the late 60s and early 70s. I was part of the first successful voter registration drive in Gadsden County that transformed that county from one that was an all-white government to one that is now very balanced and takes care of the needs of all citizens of that county. I went on to become the Executive Director of the Florida Commission on Human Relations, which is a state civil rights agency. I have lived and believed in the civil rights of protecting the civil rights of everyone in our society, and that's still my goal in life. I also have had a career as a speechwriter. In the 1970s, I was in Washington, D.C., where I was a speechwriter for President Jimmy Carter. I was one of 5 writers for him. I was proud to work for that man. I'm proud how he has conducted himself in the years since then, and I treasure my time working for him. I then went into corporate life. I spent over 31 years as a corporate speechwriter. That taught me a lot about how our economy works, and it's the kind of lessons that I think everybody in politics needs to know about how our economy works and how to create jobs, and that's been a high priority of mine. I was a Leon County Commissioner for 12 years, 1998 to 2010. We balanced the budget every year. Every year. We did it with no net increase in taxes. We not only saved our quality public services, we enhanced them, and this was during the Great Recession of the late 1990s and the late 2010s. So I know how to do this. I'm not inexperienced in politics or in government, and I want to take those lessons that I learned to Washington. Among other things, when I took office in 1998, we had 2 branch libraries in Leon County. When I left office 12 years later, we had 6 branch libraries. A lot of elected officials treat libraries like they're something nice to have, but not really necessary. Well, I think they're a core function of any government, to have good public libraries that are well equipped and open and accessible to everybody in the community, especially our children. Most recently, I was in Washington, where I was the speechwriter for the Secretary of Energy, Ernest Moniz, and for the Secretary of HUD, Julian Castro. We got a lot of wonderful things done. I am determined that we preserve that legacy of President Obama, and if I'm elected, I'm certainly going to work for that. I'm running on the theme of American greatness, and I say that because we don't need to make America great again. It is great. And you have to be, you can't look at the facts and understand that and believe that we need to be great again. What are the main parts of that greatness? The first is good jobs, good careers, the kind of jobs you can raise a family on. I've been thinking about, it takes 2 hours for me to drive here from Tallahassee. That seems like quite a burden, but there are hundreds of thousands of workers in North Florida who have to do that every day to get to a work that pays a decent wage. They can't afford to work in one of the big employment centers like Panama City or Tallahassee, so they live out where they grew up, where their parents and grandparents were. But they have to, they have to assume that burden to get to a job that pays. Second, decent health care. Health care for everybody, whether you can afford it or not. My father was the only doctor in Clayton, Illinois in the 1930s during the Depression. He took care of everybody in that community, whether they could pay or not. He was a dedicated healer. It was, for him, medicine was a calling. It wasn't an industry. He never got rich. He served in the Army in World War II. He stayed in. After retiring, he served in the Veterans Administration for another 10 years. He never got rich, and it wasn't important to him. What was important to him was healing, taking care of people in need, and he did that with just extreme dedication. Finally, character counts. Character counts. We need public officials who don't have conflicts of interest, who are not out for their personal financial gain, who vote on the merits, who vote for the people who elected them, and who are maintain high ethical standards. I've done that. I've demonstrated that in my public service already, and I'm going to do that again. Finally, Congressman Dunn. Congressman Dunn is a multimillionaire medical industry executive and banker. He has become very wealthy. He, ironically, owes his great wealth to federal spending. The Army sent him to medical school on an Army scholarship. They paid for his internship and his residency. He served his time on active duty, came here and began practicing medicine, and now has a group practice of over 100 urologists in North Florida. Now this is he talks about competition and transparency and so forth. Well, if you want to go to a urologist here in this market, you have a choice of one. My urologist in Tallahassee is in that group practice. And he doesn't like to talk to people who don't agree with him. And so, so I thought, well, I'm going to order a custom bobblehead, and this is your congressman. He may be here in spirit, I don't know, but we'll just have to settle for this. And I want to promise you that I will speak to anybody, anywhere, on any subject. I'm not afraid. I'm not out to represent Democrats or independents, or I'm out to, or just Republicans. I'm out to represent everybody, and I've done that in the past, and I will do that in the future. Finally, I want to express my basic principle of public service. It is that everybody does better when everybody does better. We cannot afford to leave anybody behind. We all do better when nobody's behind, when everybody is doing better. And that means we can't afford as an economy, we can't afford as a society, we can't afford as a nation, we can't afford as a godly people to leave anybody behind. I want to work so that nobody is left behind in this society. I want to be your next congressman in District 2. Please sign petition cards so I can qualify for the ballot. And I thank you very much for being such a great audience.